conectando.
Ela tá com saudade.
Estamos ao vivo.
Olá, pessoal. Boa tarde. Tudo bem? Mais uma aula do curso Diversidade, Inclusão e Novos Formatos no Jornalismo Pós-Cultura Digital, curso realizado e idealizado pela Rede de Jornalistas Pretos pela Diversidade na Comunicação, em parceria com a UFRJ, com o Pontão da ECO e com o apoio também da Cátedra de Comunicação da Unesco, patrocínio do Consulado e Embaixada dos Estados Unidos no Brasil, também com a parceria da Universidade Metodista. É um grande prazer a gente ter essa aula hoje, que é uma aula muito importante, com um professor que traz um ponto de vista inovador acerca do jornalismo, principalmente no ambiente, na cultura digital. Hoje comigo, Eliane Almeida, que também é da coordenação da Rede de Jornalistas, está aqui hoje, vai moderar essa aula extremamente importante, que nós estávamos aqui ansiosos, a aula Importância do Jornalismo de Paz na Cultura Digital. É uma aula que explora a relevância do jornalismo de paz na era digital, trazendo essas estratégias utilizadas para este jornalismo, para a promoção do diálogo, entendimento e prevenção de conflitos, lembrando que nós vivemos um cenário, no momento, um cenário de guerra, no nosso próprio país, né, e outros países também. É uma guerra diferente aqui, a nossa, mas não deixa de ser também um cenário de guerra, principalmente no ambiente digital, cenários de intensa disputa no ambiente digital. Então, o Stevie YoungBlood, que é um especialista enorme nessa área, ele vai trazer para a gente como analisar, como as redes sociais e plataformas digitais impactam a disseminação de informações em contexto de conflito, né, explorar esses estudos de caso que destacam a eficácia do jornalismo de paz na mediação de narrativas e na construção de pontes entre comunidades, além de trazer essa reflexão do papel do jornalista na promoção da paz digital e na mitigação de desinformação, que a gente leva um pouco adiante também, que não é um papel restrito apenas ao jornalista, mas a sociedade civil também pode colaborar. A gente tem integrantes aqui da sociedade civil no curso, também pode colaborar, utilizar essas estratégias no seu dia a dia para promover a paz no ambiente digital. Eu vou deixar a Eliane Almeida dar boa tarde aqui, falar um pouquinho do currículo do professor, e depois a gente fala da dinâmica de hoje, né, Eliane?
Isso. Bom, gente, boa tarde a todas, todas e todos. Boa tarde, Má. Boa tarde, Camila. E é isso. Professor YoungBlood tem um nome interessante já para mim. Mostra não só que ele tem o interesse em lidar com as pessoas jovens, mas isso está literalmente no seu nome, Sangue Jovem. Bom, o professor YoungBlood, ele é professor associado de comunicação na Park University. Ele organizou e ministrou workshops e seminários de jornalismo de paz em mais de 25 países. Ele está agora na Moldávia. Ele está a 6 horas à frente da gente. Então, se agora são 15 para as 2, lá são 15 para as 8 da noite. Então, ele foi 2 vezes bolsista da J. William Fulbright, recebeu numerosas bolsas e fellowships. Ele é representante especial para o jornalismo de paz do Departamento de Estado dos Estados Unidos na Etiópia. Ele é autor do livro Jornalismo de Paz, Princípios e Práticas e professor Comango. Editou a revista The Peace Journalism e escreve e produz o blog Peace Journalism Insight. Então, a gente tem hoje uma dinâmica um pouco diferente. Será que a gente consegue ficar juntos agora aqui na tela, Marcele? A gente explicar um pouquinho sobre como vai ser a aula de hoje?
Conseguimos, conseguimos, né? Acho que nós estávamos juntas aqui na tela.
Sim.
Agora sim. Então, pessoal, para a dinâmica de hoje, nós optamos para que vocês recebam esse material 100%, sem nenhum problema de conectividade, né, sem nenhuma dificuldade, até porque ele está em outro país. Ele elaborou um material breve, material gravado, e vai entrar aqui, logo após a exibição do material, para responder as perguntas de vocês, né, para a sessão de perguntas e respostas. Teremos um tradutor, Lucas Porfírio, que já está entrando aqui, que vai traduzir. Então, o professor fala inglês, né? A gente vai abrir para a sessão. A gente conta muito com a colaboração e a participação de todos. Ele está muito empolgado para conhecer todos vocês e podem tirar todas as dúvidas, trocar rede de contatos, rede de ação realmente em torno desta modalidade de jornalismo, que é uma modalidade extremamente emergente neste momento. Então, a
Então,
gente vai...
só para a gente, né, para ter, o que vai acontecer? A gente vai ter agora uma aula de em torno de 50 minutos, que é o filme que o professor mandou para a gente, essa aula gravada que ele gravou. Essa aula aí estará com ele falando em inglês, mas ela está legendada em português, então todo mundo vai conseguir acompanhar tranquilamente. E aí ele vai entrar aqui com a gente ao vivo para responder as perguntas que vocês vão ter. Então, galera do YouTube, mandem perguntas, pessoal que está aqui no Zoom, mandem perguntas também para a gente fazer para ele, porque ele quer muito essa troca. Ele está muito interessado em ter essa conversa com a gente aqui. Para isso, o Lucas vai ser o nosso tradutor, então as perguntas, vocês vão mandar as perguntas em português, e o Lucas vai traduzir para o professor, e o professor vai responder, e o Lucas vai fazer essa ponte com a gente. Então, foi a maneira que a gente encontrou, e a gente quer que dê tudo muito certo hoje. Sem esquecer, gente, que a gente ainda tem pelo menos mais 2 aulas internacionais, porque esse curso é muito chique e internacional, não é mesmo?
Inclusive, já adiantando a aula da professora Sara Max Ruiz, que vai falar um pouco sobre, vai compartilhar, na verdade, o conhecimento dela de diversidade, de patrocínio e como conseguir rentabilizar projetos voltados para a diversidade e inclusão, que ela faz nos Estados Unidos com o projeto RL Media, que é uma rede de veículos e de iniciativas liderados por negros que conseguem ali de diferentes formas rentabilizar projetos, não só pessoas negras, né, mas de projetos e veículos que abordem a diversidade e inclusão, e ela consegue gerenciar e rentabilizar esses projetos e para financiar, para mantê-los ativos, ela vem compartilhar conosco essas estratégias, esse conhecimento. Ela vem pessoalmente no campus da UFRJ, que nós fizemos a aula com a professora Rosane Bosch, que também foi uma aula muito bacana e muito elogiada. Então, ela vem pessoalmente, estamos planejando aí uma grande festa, uma grande confraternização, então a gente já deixa avisado. Tá?
Pois é.
Então,
Tem
aí,
que ir, gente. Essa aula não pode perder lá presencial de jeito nenhum.
Exatamente. Então, a gente espera também. Quem quiser pode enviar pergunta, mas quem quiser fazer sua pergunta na hora pode fazer, interagir diretamente com o professor também será bem-vindo, porque teremos o tradutor e vai ser bem bacana. Podem ficar à vontade para tirar todas as dúvidas e pensar coletivamente aqui em soluções e na aplicabilidade do que a gente vai aprender aqui hoje. Vamos colocar o vídeo para não atrasar muito?
Bora.
Vou colocar aqui para vocês. A tela cheia. Compartilhar. Verifique para mim se está certinho. Show? Vou iniciar aqui então.
Gente, então, eu preciso que alguém leia para mim, porque eu não consigo ver a legenda, senão eu não vou traduzir.
Acho que vai aparecer no vídeo.
Então, o
Caso...
problema é que eu não consigo ver, entendeu?
Ah,
Eu tô
deixa eu ver
tentando aqui porque tá muito pequenininho o vídeo aqui. O problema é que eu tô muito distante, eu não vou conseguir ler.
se você comentar um pouco. Verifica pra mim se a legenda tá grande ou tá pequena.
Dá para eu ver, eu só não vou conseguir seguir no mesmo ritmo, né? Porque ele deve estar falando inglês, não sei se vai conseguir acompanhar certo. Mas eu consigo
Entendi.
ver.
Tá legal.
Só tá sem som.
Sem som? Deixa eu ver aqui. Tá saindo? Não?
Não.
Não tá
Não.
saindo som, não.
Continua sem som.
Eu não sei se é só para mim, mas tá repetindo também, né? A gente fala e aí repete nossa voz de novo depois.
Acho que agora foi. Verifiquem pra mim.
Peace journalism. Greetings to my friends in Brazil. My name is Stephen YoungBlood. I am the director of the Center for Global Peace Journalism. I'm speaking to you from Chisinau, Moldova. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about an introduction to peace journalism. We'll be looking at some definitions and some characteristics. We'll be examining war coverage specifically with peace journalism, and then a couple of other applications like peace journalism and trauma, and peace journalism and migration. So before we start, first, just a little bit about me. I mentioned that I'm the director of the Center for Global Peace Journalism. In this capacity, I have had the privilege of teaching in 31 countries face-to-face. So roughly what you see here. Spent a great deal of time in Latin America, in Africa, in Europe. As you see, I've done a lot of work in Central and South America. I've done projects in Costa Rica, and I've done projects in Colombia. I've done some remote projects for my friends there in Brazil. And of course, I hope to visit you very soon. Certainly, we can make arrangements to make that happen. So let's talk a little bit about peace journalism. In the 1960s, a Norwegian academic by the name of Dr. Johan Galtung, he and his colleagues looked around at the media environment and they didn't like what they saw. What they saw was media that was exacerbating conflicts, media that poured gasoline on the fire, that used inflammatory language, that was sensational, that waved the flag, that was biased, that in every way more or less fed conflict rather than the opposite, somehow encouraging peace. And so Dr. Galtung and his colleagues came up with this idea of peace journalism. So let's go a little bit through the definitions and what the characteristics as well. So peace journalism is when reporters and editors make choices of what to report, how to report it, and so on, that create opportunities for society to consider and value nonviolent responses to conflict. So this definition is from two peace journalism pioneers named Dr. Jake Lynch and Annabelle McGoldrick. Now, I've taken this definition and adapted it somewhat. So the definition that we use at the Center for Global Peace Journalism is when editors and reporters make choices that can improve the prospects for peace. So these choices include how to frame stories and carefully choosing which words we use. And if we're doing these things, then we're creating an atmosphere conducive to peace, giving peacemakers a voice while making peace initiatives more visible in the public. So peace journalism is all about these choices that journalists make, especially the choices in the words that we use, the way we tell our story. So are we telling our story in such a way that it's sensational, that it glorifies the violence, or are we telling it in a different way? The language is also very important. So are we using language that's inflammatory, that demonizes, that sensationalizes? Are we saying 20 people were slaughtered in a bloody massacre? Or are we saying 20 people were killed? Obviously, that matters a great deal. What peace journalism is not, it's not open advocacy for peace. So we're not saying there must be peace, but what we are doing is leading societal discussions about peace. What does peace look like? Also, what peace journalism is not, it's not good news reporting, meaning peace journalism doesn't ignore when something terrible happens. So if there's a bombing and a whole bunch of people die, peace journalism can't pretend that that doesn't exist, that it didn't happen. So peace journalism doesn't ask, do we report it? But it asks, how do we report it? How do we frame it? What language do we use? Do we make a bad situation worse? And that's really the crux of peace journalism. So many times I'm asked, well, we're reporting something awful like a war. I mean, what can we do? How can we make that peaceful? And the answer is sometimes the best that we can do, the only thing that we can do, is to not make a bad situation worse, to not put petrol on the fire, to not make angry people angrier, and so on. So what are the characteristics of peace journalism? Let's talk about that for a moment. First of all, peace journalism is proactive, looking at the causes of conflict before conflict occurs, and then leading discussions about solutions as well. So Dr. Galton was talking about solutions reporting 50 years before there was a solutions journalism network or any movement in favor of solutions journalism. Solutions journalism is certainly something that peace journalists embrace. We just think there should be more to it than merely the solutions. So peace journalism rejects us versus them constructs and instead builds bridges. So what do I mean by us versus them? In every society, especially in politically polarized societies like Brazil, like the US, like Moldova, media has turned to these us versus them narratives, putting one political group against another political group. Of course, this extends far beyond politics. So us versus them could be Black versus white. It could be Europeans versus indigenous. It could be Christians versus non-Christians. Here in Moldova, it's Russian speakers versus Romanian speakers. And so what typical journalism does is divide people using these lines. What peace journalism does is different. What peace journalism does is it seeks to build bridges across these boundaries. For example, I have been involved in a project with an organization called the East-West Center for about 5 or 6 years now. And what this project has done is it's brought together Indian and Pakistani journalists. We've had 2 cohorts of this project. And what we've done is we brought Indian and Pakistani journalists together in Nepal. We've discussed peace journalism, and we've put them into reporting teams. So one Indian and one Pakistani reporting together about issues of importance. And you can see it all on this website called Journalists for Change. Their stories are posted here, stories about women's issues, about the environment, about the economy, about agriculture. These are cross-border reporting stories. And this is one of the ways that peace journalism builds bridges. I'm involved in a project right now in Moldova that's building bridges between, as I mentioned, the Russian-speaking community in a breakaway republic called Transnistria, and in Moldova, which is Romanian-speaking majority. So these two, I've put together journalists from these two opposing places, and they've teamed up to do this same kind of reporting. So peace journalism builds bridges. Peace journalism rejects propaganda, regardless of the source. And certainly propaganda and Russian propaganda is a major issue that we see in this region. Peace journalism illuminates and embraces complexity. So instead of merely oversimplifying, which I think is something that traditional media often do, that peace journalism embraces this complexity. And instead of offering simple solutions and ideas, presents the world in all of its complexity, with all of its nuances, with all of its gray areas. Peace journalism gives a voice to the voiceless. So traditional journalism often marginalizes different people within society. So in the US, the marginalized people might be poor people or African Americans or old people. I know in Brazil, marginalized people might include indigenous people, Black people, and the people in rural areas and so on. So instead of ignoring or barely covering these marginalized people, peace journalism seeks to give them a voice. A really good example from this is from a recent project that was done involving a colleague of mine and her students from Canada. And what they've done is they've done a Voice of the Voiceless project for Indigenous people living in the north of Canada. So we used to use the term Eskimo to describe these people, but now, of course, we call them by their indigenous name. They're in an Inuit community. And so what this team of student journalists and their professors did is they went to this location above the Arctic Circle, and they gave a voice to these Native Canadians. And the voice, the story has to do with a clean energy project that they're engaged in. So they produced this video that I'm going to show you a little bit of. And this video was so good and so popular that it was shown on Canadian national television. So it's been seen millions of times. So let's take a quick look at this Voice of the Voiceless video.
Akaro tao sa likitani tamani ku. Kamayutsu tatamak kuninga nunani. Tamak kuninga emang. Avati talimat ilwani tuinak kasi itong nahaksimaw. Salumay tuit uksualut tutut ikumaliroti ikumatit siwut ikumani. Ukuyo titsisutilu iluyuatini. Kisiani uksualuk salumay litiriyok anirnisarmi. Sirmimi imangmilo. Taman na nukahulak tavut. Taman na lo asi ito lang alaksu.
For here we have our 500-gallon tank, which heats our homes. Sometimes we run out of fuel. We don't have any heat in our homes sometimes for a day or two. Even if there's a small spill, you can smell it in the whole, in the whole house. So even inside in the house, sometimes there's fuel spills and there's leaks. Sometimes the tanks are so old that they start to rust, and they start to have leaks around these places, around the bottom ends here, and that's where it starts to leak, and that's where it's very dangerous. All of our communities right now, we're all dependent on diesel. We use about 3 million liters of diesel every year. The recreation center, the hospital here, the local clinic, it's a constant risk.
Okay, so that's a classic voice of the voiceless story, letting, again, in their own voice, and the music was even their own music, letting them tell this story. So I think that's some really remarkable work that this group of students did. So the sixth characteristic of peace journalism is that it provides depth and context rather than just oversimplified, superficial type of reporting. Peace journalists consider the consequences of their reporting. So if I tell this story in this way, what happens? Am I further polarizing the society? Am I making angry people angrier? Am I making peace less possible? Peace journalists are very careful about the words that we use, avoiding inflammatory, sensational, demonizing language, language that's hate speech, language that name calls, that reinforces stereotypes. And you heard me use some of the language earlier. Massacre, atrocity, terrorist. All of these things are very subjective and don't add much to the story anyway, except for fuel on the fire. We're also very careful about the images that we select. So why do we use a certain image? Do we use it because it's sensational or because it's needed to tell the story? We'll look at some examples in a minute. Finally, peace journalism offers counter narratives that debunk media created or perpetuated stereotypes, myths, and misperceptions. And so what do we mean by that? Traditional media tend to get into a rut when they tell stories. They tell the same kinds of stories about the same people or about the same country or about the same situation. They tell these same stories over and over again. So in the West, when we hear a story about Africa, what is that story about? Typically, it's about war, it's about famine, it's about disease, it's about disaster of some sort. What I mean by a counter narrative would be to tell different kinds of stories about Africa, stories about African scholars and African business success and African athletes, and so on and so forth. Something that's different from the usual. Okay, well, now that you know a little bit about peace journalism, I'm going to put you to work. So what I'd like you to do is to look at the story that's on your screen and tell me, do you think this is peace journalism or not? So at this time, you might want to pause the recording, let everyone have a chance to read it, and then be ready to answer the question for me, is it peace journalism or not? So you might want to pause your recording right here. Okay, so now that you've had a chance to look at this, let's discuss, is it peace journalism? And the answer is, no, it is not. I hope you figured that out. So look at the language that's used. Massacre, atrocity. Look at the graphic, sensational description. One man's head was smashed in, right? Look at the way the story is told. It's very unbalanced. It's very one-sided, right? Look at the very first sentence. Peace talks aimed at ending the conflict in Macedonia lay in ruins. What is that saying? Peace is impossible. Now that this has happened, there's no peace. It's not possible. And if peace is not possible, then what's the only alternative? And the answer, of course, is war, is violence. So this is the very antithesis of peace journalism. Now, here's the same story written as peace journalism. I'm going to ask you to pause again and to read this, and then I'll tell you why it's peace journalism. So pause here. So why is this peace journalism? First of all, notice that the inflammatory language is gone. Notice as well that the story is better balanced. So the information from this Ali Ahmedi, it's much further up in the story. So it's a little better balanced. Sounds like we're being joined by an ambulance. It's not coming for me, that's the main thing. I'm sorry, it's coming for anyone, but you know. Anyway, so that language is not there, it's better balanced. Look at the lead. There was condemnation across the political spectrum. So instead of throwing up our hands and saying peace is impossible, we're saying, look, this wasn't a good thing, but at least we can agree that it's a bad thing and that we can move on from here. All right? So that's the same story written as peace journalism. We could do the same thing with video stories, with stories online, and so on. So don't get the idea that peace journalism is just for written stories. It applies to all sorts of stories. Okay, so a few months ago, I was asked by the International Center for Journalism. Well, before I talk about that, let me back up a minute. So when Dr. Gauteng and his colleagues first came up with peace journalism, they saw it as an antidote to bad war reporting, to war reporting that puts gasoline on the fire, that's irresponsible. What we've come to learn in the years since is that peace journalism style reporting can be useful in many different reporting domains. So in my textbook, Peace Journalism Principles and Practices, I have chapters on using peace journalism to report terrorism, peace journalism and crime reporting, peace journalism and election reporting. And of course, it still applies to reporting about wars. We found that these 10 principles are widely applicable. So several months ago, the International Center for Journalists contacted me, and they wanted me to do a session about peace journalism and coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. And so the more I thought about it, the more I thought, rather than try to analyze the media myself, which is really a job that you need graduate students for, that perhaps instead I could ask some pointed questions that can really get us to thinking about what peace journalism is like when we're reporting a war. So although I created these for a discussion about Israel-Hamas, certainly they're equally applicable when we talk about the war in Ukraine. So here in Moldova, Ukraine is next door. So when I talk about war here, that's obviously the war that's at the forefront of everyone's mind. So when you're talking about war, when you look at the coverage, does the coverage present all victims as worthy? Or does it divide it into their victims and our victims? Do the stories and images accurately portray suffering on all sides? Several weeks ago, the New York Times did an article that talked about Israeli media and how very few images of suffering in Gaza are actually seen in Israeli media, which I thought was really interesting. So when you wonder why is there such universal support among the Israeli public, I think we can say this is one of the reasons that the Israeli public hasn't really been exposed to these images that the rest of us have seen. Is the coverage contextual? So does it merely show the day-to-day aspects? Israel attacked here, bombed here, so many refugees went here. Does it only give that superficial coverage, or is the coverage contextual? For example, does the coverage somewhere talk about the blockade of Gaza, which has occurred for more than a decade, which really choked off Gaza and brought a sense of desperation there? Does the coverage mention that Hamas is dedicated to the destruction of Israel? So these two contextual facts, I think, are important if you want to try to understand what's going on. Are the media disseminating only factual, verified information and images? So there's so much disinformation out there. So images have been taken from previous conflicts in the region 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and being reposted as though what's happening is happening now. So I think as media outlets, we have to be really, really careful about avoiding these pitfalls. Does the coverage stereotype, scapegoat, and demonize them? So whenever you hear the term all, you know that the coverage is not peace journalism. All Israelis want war. All Israelis are bloodthirsty. All Palestinians are terrorists. Is there any discussion of peace? So very often, during a war especially, any ideas and notions about peace tend to get marginalized or ignored completely. And there have been lots of academic studies that have shown this. I haven't seen any studies yet from the Israel-Gaza conflict, but I did do a small study myself about coverage or lack thereof, coverage of peace during Ukraine war coverage. So what I did, and this is my blog, what I did was I looked at approximately about 90,000 articles through a search on Nexus Uni. And what I did is I looked for violent traditional journalism language like battle, weapons, tank, missile. And then I looked for peace and peace journalism language like peace, reconciliation, compromise, and so on. So you see the results in front of you, and they shouldn't come as any surprise. By a 5-to-1 margin, there are many more mentions of violence, of traditional war terms, than there are mentions about peace. So as I said before, this is pretty typical of any time we have coverage during a war. This is, I think, pretty typical. What are the consequences of the reporting? So does the war coverage make peace even less likely? Right now in both the Middle East and in Ukraine, peace seems impossible. But even President Zelensky has said, look, at some point, this is going to end, and it's going to end at a negotiating table somewhere. Are we talking about peace at all? And is our reporting so angry, so inflammatory, so demonizing that it makes peace even less possible? That when the time comes to sit down, will the parties even be able to sit down? So that's what I mean by the consequences of the reporting. So if we hate them so much, how can we negotiate? How can we compromise? How can we do the things necessary to bring about peace? On social media, are journalists actively combating falsehoods about the war? So we know there's a ton of mis and disinformation on the internet. Is the coverage biased? Is it good guys versus bad guys? Are voices heard from only one side? So it's very typical in war coverage. US coverage of the Iraq War, for example, coverage now in Ukraine, in Gaza, that the people hear from only their side. So Israelis are hearing from the Israeli side and Palestinians and Arabs from their side. And that coverage tends to not just use us versus them, but to demonize them. We're right, they're wrong. We're good, they're evil. And is the coverage sensational? So are we using images? Are we using words that are designed to get the audience's attention, but that don't really add anything to the substance of the story? So to test this, I wanted to spend a minute or two and look at some images from the Israel-Gaza war. And these are images taken during the last several months of the war. So as you're looking at these, if you like, pause at any time to discuss in class. Or when I'm live and we're having a question and answer session, we can talk about them then. So let me show you a few of these, and I'll tell you what I'm thinking as well. So here's the first set of front pages. Okay, so you see the upper left image of a man and his children, the lower left image of dead bodies on a street, the lower right image of wounded and bloodied children in Gaza. So if you want to pause here, you can. And then in a few seconds, I'll tell you what I think. So what I think is that the images on the left, while they're a bit on the sensational side, I'm okay with them. The dead bodies in the street are borderline acceptable because at least we can't see their faces. As for the children on the right, I always have a hard time using children. I always ask myself, what if these were my children? So I'll ask you, what if these were your nieces and nephews or your brothers and sisters? How would you feel about this photo? So I'm not saying we shouldn't use it, but I am saying that we need to be thoughtful and careful when we're using these. Okay, here's two more. Again, you can pause for a second, and then I'll tell you what I think. So I'm okay with the image on the left. You can't see the person's face, so I think maybe it's not as intrusive. I think the images on the right, the one on the far right, I'm okay with. The one with the woman upset and wailing, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about it. Ask yourself, what is this? What if this was your mom? Are you re-traumatizing this victim? Or is this photo necessary to show the misery in Gaza? 2 more. See what you think. I'll pause for a second. So the one on the left, if I seem ambivalent about these, it's because I am. If this is your sister, are you okay with that photo? Are we re-traumatizing her? Or do we need this photo to tell the story? The one on the right, I'm okay with. It does show a child, but I'm not sure that she's identifiable. And I think that it shows some context to the story. Okay, one final one. I'll pause here for a second. So this is, as I'm sure you know, the antithesis of peace journalism, is it not? So look at the language, bloodbath. Look at the photos. It's clearly designed to be sensational, caring much less about telling the story and much more about selling newspapers and getting clicks. You can't tell from where you are, but if you got a close look at the photo of the child, it's even been photoshopped so that the blood on the child's face has been turned redder. Is redder a word? Turned more red using Photoshop to make it stand out, to make it even more sensational. So yeah, this is definitely the antithesis of peace journalism. All right, so that's just an example of a few images. What I want to close with today are 2 more sort of areas where I think peace journalism can be especially useful. So the first of these has to do with reporting about trauma survivors. And there's an organization called the DART Center. And as you see, the DART Center has produced this handbook called Trauma and Journalism. When you get a chance, look this up. It's at dartcenter.org. And I think that it's really useful. Something that my peace journalism colleagues and I have done, the more that I talk about reporting on disasters, reporting on wars, reporting about refugees, we realize that so many of the people that we report about have been traumatized. And so peace journalism and the DART Center talk about more responsible ways to report about those who have been traumatized. And so this particular guide talks about how you interview people who have been traumatized. And the way you interview them, simply enough, is very carefully. For example, it says here, never use the question, how do you feel? It talks about how you're telling the story, again, in a way that's extremely sensitive, that in a way that's extra detailed so that the facts are correct, because using incorrect facts can re-traumatize as well. You need to be careful about empowering and not disempowering those who you're talking to, and so on. And so what peace journalism and reporting traumatized people boils down to is this. You never want to re-traumatize someone who's already gone through a terrible trauma. And so you want to be very considerate of them, to grant a first name only interview if that's the way they want it, to not be intrusive, to not ask stupid questions like, how do you feel after someone was killed? to not treat the interview like you would an interview with a politician, right? All aimed towards sensitivity towards the victim and not re-traumatizing her. All right, peace journalism also discusses at length talking about how we report migrants. And so I've done projects on peace journalism and refugee reporting in Germany, in Austria, in Turkey, in Lebanon, here in Moldova. So peace journalism can really give us some good ideas about how we report about refugees. Certainly, since they've been traumatized, everything I just said about trauma applies. You know, typical journalism often tends to report migrants and especially refugees in a negative way, to scapegoat them for societal problems. So rents are going up in Germany and it's the Iraqis' fault. Prices are rising in Moldova, it's the Ukrainian refugees' fault, right? So typical journalism also tends to be to crime narratives, that migrants are criminals. We've heard a lot of this from Donald Trump and his right-wing friends, that if migrants come to the US, that they'll commit more crimes, even though this is a lie. Statistics show that when immigrants come to the US, they commit fewer crimes per capita than Americans do. So when migrants move into your community, it actually makes it safer. So you get this crime narrative. You also get a narrative about migrants, narratives that dehumanize them, using water metaphors, that there's a flood or an inundation, using metaphors like swarm, right? So certainly there are lots of ways that the media can do a better job with migrants. One example of a story that I think does a good job of showing empathy for migrants appeared a couple of years ago on NPR, which is National Public Radio in the United States. So this particular story was done by a reporter who I really admire named Scott Simon. And what Simon did was to interview an immigrant who had been separated by Trump administration policy, who had been separated from her very young child. So this is an audio report. We'll listen to just a couple of minutes of this so that you get a feel for what it's like.
Hundreds of migrant children are still separated from their families as a result of the Trump administration's earlier zero-tolerance immigration policy at the border. Some migrant children have been reunited, but their pain and trauma continue.
He doesn't want to go to school because he thinks he's not going to see me again and that I won't be there when he comes home.
Mercy, who is 32 years old, fled Guatemala with her 3-year-old son because she says her husband drank a lot and hit her. She says she paid a smuggler $25,000 to get them to the U.S. border so they could apply for asylum. They reached the border at San Luis, Arizona in February, but were separated by U.S. officials. Separated for 5 months. We're only using Mercy's first name because she fears how this interview could affect her asylum claim. Mercy remained in a detention center in Arizona. Her son was placed in a shelter in Phoenix and with a family in Texas.
2 meses estuvo allí en Texas.
2 months he was in Texas with a family, and they would take me out every 8 days to sign deportation papers so that I would sign to go without him. And then at some point they said that if I signed the papers, I could go with him. The Guatemalan consulate told me not to sign it because I shouldn't go anywhere without my son, so that really scared me.
Did officials more or less force you to sign a document that you were going to be deported? Is that what they kept asking?
Yes, that's what it was, by force. I said, if you give me my son, I'll sign. And they said, yes, he's here close by. But I said, until I see him with my own eyes, I'm not going to sign the papers. Officials in blue and khaki came by and they asked me why I was separated from my son, because at that point he was 3 years and 4 months. And they said that he was way too young to have been separated from me and that they were going to reunite us. So one night they took me out of the detention center. They called my sister to buy tickets to pick us up because we were going to be together again.
What was that like?
Oh, pues fue muy triste porque cuando empezaron a entregar a los niños,
It was very sad
me dieron el mío.
because when they started to pass the kids back, when they started to give us our kids back, he said he didn't know me, and that was really hard for me. That's how it was. It was really hard for me because he didn't want to see me. He hit me in the face, and he said, take me to Lorena, to her house, because they wash me there, they take care of me. I don't want to be with you. And he doesn't want to go to school, and I tell him to, because you have to learn, and I'll be right back. So I'm still in this recovery process with him, because he doesn't want to lose me.
It sounds, as I don't have to tell you, as if your son is having a rough time.
Sí, así es. Pero
Yes, that's it. But now sometimes he remembers and he says, you're not going to leave, you're going to be here with me. And now he doesn't even want to sleep by himself, so he sleeps with me and grabs me and holds me, and he wants me to be near.
What do you worry about when it comes to your son in the months and the years ahead for you?
oh, pues es lo que
I'm
me da
worried
pena
because he doesn't want to go to school, and immigration might say I don't send him to school. So I try and convince him by telling him I'm going to buy him a Peppa Pig backpack, but he doesn't want to go. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't think I'm going to be able to get him to go to school this year, but maybe next year.
Well, he's 3. I'd say it's important to be with his mother.
Sí, así es, pues.
Yes, I have him coddled and taking care of him, so he forgets the moment he was taken away. The worst part about that is that he was taken while he was sleeping. He was sleeping along the way, so he woke up without me.
I'm sorry, they took your child while he was sleeping?
Sí.
Yes, he was sleeping when they came for more kids. The other kids were older, so they stayed awake, but he's younger, so he was sleeping, and I was holding him while he was sleeping for a while, but when they took him away, he was still asleep, so he woke up without me.
So when he went to sleep, I'm having a difficult time with this. When he went to sleep, he was in his mother's arms, and when he woke up, he thought his mother had given him up.
That's how it went.
Okay, I think a very powerful story that I would say certainly reflects the best principles of peace journalism. Okay, so as we begin to conclude today, then we've seen that peace journalism can have utility in a number of areas. That it's a different way of thinking about reporting, about thinking about the consequences of our reporting, of being thoughtful and considerate when we're using words, when we're using images. Deliberate's a word that I use a lot. That we as journalists are more deliberate in what we do and how we do it, and then we're always considering the consequences, right? So we're always thinking about, if I use these words, if I tell the story, if I frame the story in this way, what happens? So this is, on your screen, the website for the Center for Global Peace Journalism. It's at peacejorncenter.blogspot.com. You see along the right-hand side, archived issues of the Peace Journalist magazine. So this is a twice-a-year magazine that my center produces. If I can get a copy, I thought I had one right here. Here we go. a twice-a-year magazine that my center produces that's distributed worldwide. I know that that you've had some articles, that we've definitely had some articles from Brazil in the magazine. So I encourage you to, if you're interested in learning more about peace journalism, to certainly look through these magazines. I encourage you as well to take a look at the website for the Center for Global Peace Journalism. I'm sorry, my blog that's called Peace Journalism Insights. It's at stephenyoungblog.blogspot.com. And you will find, at least for now, it's mostly talking about my Fulbright in Moldova. Here's more of a fun article about a train trip that I took from Chisinau, Moldova to Bucharest, Romania to teach. And here's an article about my experiences in Bucharest, teaching there. Another one about a webinar I participated in, and so on and so forth. Okay, so my contact information you see on your screen. You should see on your screen. Let's try this again. So my contact information is here. I encourage you to contact me anytime with questions, with comments, and so on. I'm at stephen.youngblood@fulbrightmail.org. I will share those all those website addresses with you again. And if we can make the technology work, I hope to be able to see you soon for a question and answer session. So it's been my pleasure chatting with you today. And I look forward to seeing you online, and I hope very soon in Brazil. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Depois dessa aula, né, essa introdução incrível, Stevie's here. Get started for the questions. Lucas Atílio é o nosso tradutor, Miltinho. Lucas, our translator, is here too.
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
I can. Bom dia.
Yeah. Vou falar em português, porque senão vou ficar falando em inglês e você em inglês.
Just a little bit. Actually, I'm speaking to you from Moldova, and the couple of times that I've been in Brazil, after a week or so, I found myself really catching on to some Portuguese. And one time someone asked me, do you happen to speak Romanian? And I said, yes. And they said, well, that's it. Romanian and Portuguese, I guess, are very close cousins.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know this. So it's very nice to meet you here. And I was crying in the finish when you are ending the history about the woman who lost his baby. This is hard. But I think that the people has questions. If they don't have, we can talk more here. Thank you for here.
O Lucas está com tradução para todos, ou Milton? Como está?
Aqui, aparentemente, está ativado o áudio dele de tradução para escutar em português.
Não é finalizado. Sabe enviar?
Ok, então nós falamos inglês. E quem traduz para o Steven? Eu falo inglês para o Steven, então?
Depois, se você quiser vir aqui...
Estão me escutando? Acho que meu áudio desligou.
Agora
Eu
Agora a
ativei
gente te
aqui
ouve.
a escuta em português.
Ok, thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. Eu quero fazer a primeira pergunta, or I want to make the first question about the piece of journalism and the journalism of diversity. What is talking about this?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Ele faz você, que seu inglês é melhor que o meu. A gente fez sobre o jornalismo, né? Jornalismo pela paz e o jornalismo pela diversidade, né? As proximidades e como aplicar
So
isso.
excuse me, I'm not getting the interpretation. I've selected the English on the translation under interpretation, but I'm not getting it.
I think that you can do the question in Portuguese, and Lucas can translate to him. Entendeu, Marcelo? Você faz a pergunta em português.
Okay, well, let's
e aí
just
o
do it that
Lucas
way.
faz.
Do the question in Portuguese, and then we'll have Lucas translate.
Yes, exactly.
Fica assim
Yes.
normal.
Só queria pedir para o pessoal, por favor, fechar seus microfones. Lucas, eu acho que você está sem áudio. Está sem áudio.
You're muted, Marcel.
Marcel is questioning if you can see some similarity with the journalism of peace and diversity in the journalism.
I think the answer to that is yes, that I think one of the reasons why traditional journalism has marginalized so many voices is because traditional journalism newsrooms have not been diverse. So Lucas, I'll let you translate that and then I'll continue the discussion.
Yeah. Mas eu não consigo te ouvir. A gente não te ouve, Lucas. Será que se você sair e entrar de novo, resolve? Tá. So the Lucas will go out and come back because he can't speak. So, o professor disse, a princípio, que existe sim uma similaridade entre a comunicação, mas que não deram voz justamente para esses marginalizados por causa do potencial mesmo da comunicação, né? Então, o processo de silencialização, de silenciamento. Vou esperar o Lucas voltar.
Tá entrando de novo. Vou ativar de novo aqui a tradução para português.
Mas nós vamos ouvir a voz do Lucas, né?
So while we're waiting for Lucas, I can answer a question.
Conseguimos ouvir. Eu consegui.
I can answer a question. Maybe Eliane, maybe you can translate.
Lucas is here already, but still a gente continua não conseguindo ouvir.
Lucas, você está ouvindo?
Você não tem um fone, Lucas? Será que com fone de ouvido você não consegue?
Lucas, você consegue ouvir?
Eu consigo te ouvir.
Miltinho tá ouvindo o Lucas?
Deixa eu verificar aqui. Seu áudio tá perfeitinho pra mim. Deixa eu verificar o que tá acontecendo aqui. Fala agora de novo, rapidinho. Lucas? Na escuta? Lucas, na escuta? 3, 2, 1.
Está pedindo para vocês falarem.
Eu tô falando, mas ele não tá me escutando.
O Lucas não, Lucas. Ele está perguntando aqui no chat se a gente consegue ouvi-lo, mas não.
Não conseguimos te ouvir. Deixa eu ligar interpretador de novo. Fala alguma coisa, Lucas. Ó, ele tá falando, mas não tá saindo áudio.
Lucas, vai ali no microfone, tem uma setinha para cima. Aí aciona o seu microfone ali.
Perfeitamente. Consegui ouvir. Eu consegui. Deixa eu ver se o resto conseguiu.
Não, eu ainda não.
Eliane, você consegue me ouvir?
Sim.
Sim, eu consigo ouvir o Lucas, mas ele não consegue ouvir vocês.
Então, porque assim,
Tá
nessa
ouvindo?
setinha desse microfone, no
Mas
microfone
acho que eles
tem...
que não estão ouvindo você. Deixa eu verificar.
Ó, no
Traz o Lucas
microfone...
pro canal principal. Tira o Lucas do canal de tradutor. Traz ele pro canal principal, Milton. Por favor.
Eu tô te escutando.
Desabilita a intérprete de idioma. Deixa só ele aqui normal.
Pronto, acho que agora foi. Diz alguma coisa, Lucas. Não.
Não.
Vocês conseguem me ouvir agora?
Agora sim!
Nossa!
Aleluia! Yes!
Okay. So,
Okay.
I'm sorry
So
to be so spontaneous, but I'm happy.
So let me answer the first question. The reason that media have traditionally marginalized people is because newsrooms have traditionally not represented the communities that they write about.
O motivo da mídia marginalizar as informações é em decorrência da comunidade também se vê obrigada a se ler dessa forma.
So when you have Black people in your newsroom, you're naturally going to write more stories and more meaningful stories about the lives of Black people.
Quando você tem pessoas pretas, né, na mídia, ela vai trazer mais histórias de pessoas pretas.
And when you have women in your newsroom, same thing. You're going to be able to take stories from female perspectives.
Quando você tem mulheres falando, elas trarão as perspectivas das mulheres também.
Thank you. So let me take a question from the chat.
Agora ele vai responder uma pergunta do chat.
So the question is about how peace journalism can apply to election coverage.
Como o jornalismo da paz pode trabalhar com relação às eleições governamentais.
So one of the things that Brazil and the United States have in common is that we're both very politically polarized societies.
Dos pontos que o Brasil tem muito em comum com os Estados Unidos é ser um país politicamente polarizado.
And so we have, in both countries, media speaking only to their tribe.
Então, a gente tem em ambos os países a mídia falando especificamente para cada tribo.
So you have right-wing media in Brazil speaking to the Bolsonaro party, and you have right-wing media in the US speaking to Trump people, Trump supporters.
Tem a mídia no Brasil que fala especificamente para o Bolsonaro, e também, assim como tem a mídia nos Estados Unidos que fala para o público do Trump.
So what can we as peace journalists do about this?
E o que a gente, como jornalista da paz, pode fazer sobre isso?
So I think it goes back to what I mentioned in the video, which is building bridges across boundaries.
Eu já trouxe isso no vídeo. A nossa missão é meio que construir pontes entre os pontos.
So how do we initiate meaningful dialogues between one political tribe and another political tribe?
E como que a gente inicia esse diálogo entre um lado político e outro lado político?
And I think one of the ways that we do this is to turn down the heat of our reporting.
Dos modos que a gente tem de fazer isso é meio que baixar um pouco as armas e trazer a reportagem.
And to be more vigilant about trying to present multiple perspectives in our reporting.
E trazer múltiplas perspectivas do que a gente traz como reportagem.
So we're not going to end political polarization in either country, but I do think that by doing these things, we can help turn down the political heat.
Eu creio que não vai existir um final da polarização política, mas pode ter uma redução dessa luta de política polarizada.
Okay, I'm ready for some more questions. There are some questions in the chat in Portuguese. If you want to translate one of those, or if someone wants to give me a question orally.
A Cíntia Arayum. Cíntia, você quer fazer a pergunta? E pode ser em português, se apresentar, falar seu estado, fazer a pergunta diretamente? Ou eu faço essa pergunta por você? Cíntia, está aí?
So, Lucas, could you translate that for me, please?
She's asking if Cynthia is here to make a question for you.
Okay.
Ela pergunta, mostrar a emoção do repórter cabe nesta forma mais cuidadosa de fazer jornalismo, pois os jornalistas são ensinados a ser totalmente isentos e distantes da notícia.
Can the reporters show their emotion, because the journalists are instructed to be a little bit of aware and not show their emotion when they're showing the news?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, since journalism has been a profession, we've all been taught this idea that journalists must remain objective and that we should leave our opinions out of stories.
Sim, os jornalistas eles foram meio que instruídos categoricamente a se mostrar objetivos para mostrar a história.
But we know that this is an ideal, that we can strive towards objectivity, but we know that there's no way that we can eliminate our emotions, eliminate our biases.
Sim, a gente foi instruído a ser objetivo, mas não tem como a gente eliminar nossas emoções, o que a gente está sentindo nesse momento.
So I think the best that we can do is to be aware of these biases and to do the best we can to compensate for them.
O melhor a fazer é, realmente, não tem como a gente eliminar as emoções nessas vias. O melhor a fazer é equilibrar isso para que possa ser transmitida a notícia de uma forma mais objetiva.
As far as emotion is concerned, I would say that there's no clear-cut guideline on this.
Não tem, assim, um modo de falar, faça desse jeito ou faça do outro.
I think if the emotion is genuine, and that if it's not presented in a way that's sensational, then it's probably okay.
De forma que, se o sentimento, a emoção for genuíno e não for mostrado de forma sensacionalista, tá tudo ok.
I don't think any of us would object to the emotion that Scott Simon showed on the audio report that we heard.
Também não pode ser da mesma forma que o Scott Simon mostrou na reportagem no áudio que a gente ouviu.
Obrigado.
Obrigado.
You say that better than I do, Lucas.
Lucas, eu queria que passasse para ele que os comentários aqui no YouTube também, né, temos no total ao torno de 80 pessoas, não, 60 pessoas aqui acompanhando, né, 30 no YouTube, 30 pessoas aqui. Então, temos ao todo 60 pessoas. Foi uma semana também de conflitos aqui no Brasil, de várias decisões. E sobre um relato que ele trouxe, né, das imagens em Gaza, imagens que foram tiradas há 5, 10 anos antes e que foram republicadas agora, como sendo agora. Como a gente faz esse monitoramento desse tipo de jornalismo que usa informações fora de contexto. É um monitoramento feito especificamente pelo jornalismo de paz, mas que nós podemos adotar no dia a dia, né, uma investigação, enfim, e os efeitos nocivos desse tipo de jornalismo.
Okay. Marceli told that we have around 60 person following us on YouTube, and around overall. We had this week some bad information here on Brazil that were shared to us, but she also asked about one point you brought about the pictures that were showed. How can we monitor this picture that were showed out of context? For example, they were pictures from 10 years ago, they were showed now, and how can we monitor it and the impact of it on our journalists?
So I'm not sure exactly what you mean by monitor it. Do you mean I'm not really sure what you mean by monitor it. Do you mean the impact it has on audiences? Is that what you mean?
Marceli, esse monitoramento, né, com relação à audiência, com relação ao quê?
A esse tipo de ação, né, de reportagem, que pode conter esse tipo de estratégia, né, de pegar, eu entendi quando ele perguntou o que isso significa, de pegar fotos e vídeos anteriores ao cenário atual, né, replicar para montar essa narrativa, para mudar essa narrativa, ou reforçar a narrativa que o jornalista, o veículo quer imprimir, principalmente agora nessa situação em Gaza.
It's about the impact of for example, the journalists bring photos or videos from 10 years ago and bring it as actual, and how can we monitor and avoid it to happen?
Oh, good. Yeah. Okay.
And mainly about the also happening in Gaza.
I understand. So, I mean, it's up to us as journalists to always ensure the authenticity of any content that we distribute.
É interessante que a gente, como jornalista, possa checar a autenticidade de todo o conteúdo que a gente distribui.
So in terms of images specifically, we have tools like Google Image Search that we can do a reverse image search, and we can find the source of the photo and when it was first published and so on.
Com relação a imagens, a gente tem as ferramentas como Google Imagens, Google equipamentos de imagem reversa, que a gente pode encontrar a fonte dessas imagens.
But you're right, Marcel, this is a big problem. We've seen lots of photos from 5 or 10 or 15 years ago that have been published now that claim to be current and that really misrepresent the event.
E você está certa, Marcele, porque tem imagens de 5, 10, 15 anos que estão sendo publicadas como atuais e realmente deturpam esse evento.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seu áudio está meio que picotando, Marcele.
Acho que sua conexão está um pouco estável, Marcelo.
Eu já estou aqui se precisar, gente.
So I'll go on ahead and answer a question that's in the chat.
Ok.
And it regards teaching future professionals about peace journalism.
Yes. What do you think about what suggested by
No, I read the question. Let me go on ahead and answer.
Okay. And so go ahead, please.
It turns out that I can sort of read these questions. I read that one anyway. and so I think I've done peace journalism seminars for professional journalists in 31 countries.
Ele já tem trabalhado com seminários e jornalismo da paz em 31 países.
And with older journalists, sometimes they're receptive to these ideas and sometimes they're not.
Alguns jornalistas, às vezes, recebem essas informações, às vezes não.
That's why instruction in peace journalism, in media literacy, in peace social media is so important for younger people.
Esta é a razão do que a instrução de jornalismo da paz vem como uma alfabetização midiática de paz. A social media é muito importante para os jornalistas mais jovens.
Here in Moldova, I'm teaching media literacy and media skills to fifth graders.
Aqui não. Lá na Moldávia, ele está ensinando alfabetização midiática para os alunos da 5ª série.
And then to high school students, I'm speaking with them about how we can apply peace journalism to their online life and to their social media posts and reposts.
Os alunos do ensino médio, ele tem ensinado como conviver e como analisar as informações das mídias sociais que eles têm contato com isso.
And then to university students, of course, to journalism students, more of the traditional peace journalism that you saw today.
E para os estudantes de jornalismo, e para os estudantes de jornalismo, um modo mais tradicional, como vocês viram no vídeo que ele passou.
So I think the real answer is to work on multiple levels. And I think that not just university students, but younger students as well need to develop a sensitivity and a sophistication about dealing with media.
E talvez a verdadeira resposta é trabalhar em vários níveis, né? Acho que não apenas os estudantes universitários, mas também os estudantes mais novos, eles precisam desenvolver essa sensibilidade e sofisticação para trabalhar com as mídias.
Thank you.
Obrigado.
I have a
Lucas,
question.
Sure.
Eu vou fazer em português, então, a pergunta. E tem a ver com o mercado de trabalho. Os jornalistas, eles entram nos veículos e eles precisam seguir a linha editorial. Além da linha editorial, eles precisam escrever de forma que seja garantido o clique. Como fazer o equilíbrio entre ser um jornalista responsável e não perder o emprego?
She asking about the work market. The journalists, when they starts working, they have to follow the way to write, to have a greater assistance and assure the click. How to standardize it to assure this way and be an honest journalist?
That's a really good question. And it's a balancing act that anyone interested in peace journalism has to accomplish.
A questão é um ato de equilíbrio, né? Que realmente foi sua questão, que uma pessoa interessada em jornalismo da paz deve realizar.
One of the answers is, I think that peace journalism training has to occur for editors as well. And that when editors understand peace journalism, that they're more likely to be accepting of peace journalism style stories.
Uma das respostas que ele traz é que a formação de jornalismo para a paz, ela deve ocorrer também para os editores.
And if these editors and even media owners have had this training in peace journalism, then I think we're more likely to see it actually reflected in the product.
E que não apenas os editores, mas também os donos das mídias tenham esse conhecimento do jornalismo da paz para que possam trabalhar isso de um estilo mais do jornalismo da paz.
One of the problems that we have is simply in traditional attitudes about what kinds of reports that the public will pay attention to.
Dos problemas que a gente tem é simplesmente nas atitudes tradicionais, os tipos de reportagens que o público vai prestar atenção.
So I was taught in journalism school, back when dinosaurs ruled the earth, that people wouldn't pay attention to our reports unless they were sensational and bloody and use really inflammatory language.
Ele falou que se você falar que os dinossauros vão voltar para a Terra, vai chamar bastante atenção, e as reportagens que vão chamar mais atenção ainda são aquelas que são mais sangrentas, que usam a linguagem realmente inflamatória.
And journalists have been, students in journalism school have been taught this for years.
Os estudantes de jornalismo têm pensado nisso já há bastante tempo.
The truth is different. According to studies done by Dr. Jake Lynch and others, audiences actually prefer peace journalism style stories.
De acordo com alguns estudos feitos pelo Dr. Jake Lynch e junto com outros também, o público realmente prefere histórias no estilo jornalismo da paz.
And they prefer these stories because audiences feel empowered. Audiences feel better informed than they do at traditional reporting.
Eles preferem porque o público se sente mais fortalecido e o público se sente parte dessa revolução feita pelo jornalismo da paz.
So our challenge now is to get this word out to reporters, to editors, to media owners, to help them understand that they can practice peace journalism and still make money, can still have successful media houses.
E o ponto mesmo, né, é que os repórteres e editores possam chegar aos proprietários das grandes mídias e ajudá-los a compreender que, ao praticar o jornalismo da paz e ainda ganhar dinheiro, eles podem ter empresa de mídia de sucesso.
Merci.
Bientôt.
Ah! Formidable.
Apu.
Polyglot.
Tem uma pergunta da Sandra Martins. Antes da minha internet falhar, a gente conseguiu fazer a pergunta da Sandra?
Qual que foi a da Sandra? Porque para mim
Que
não
tipo
aparece.
de apoio... Tá. Que tipo de apoio essa mãe vitimada por esse tipo de sequestro pelo Estado, em especial no que tange numa possível represária, caso a criança não esteja pronta para voltar à escola? Retratar as denúncias são vitais, mas como lidar com as possíveis represálias contra as vítimas?
Essa não foi feita.
Vamos lá?
Steven.
Ela tá falando, a pergunta está falando sobre aquela mãe que aparece na matéria que o professor apresentou aqui, que teve o filho de 3 anos retirado dela.
Steven, we have a question here on chat. Do you want to translate it for you, or can you read it by translated?
Let me see it.
Sandra Martins. It's sent from Carol Desotti.
Let's see, que tipo de... Why don't you go on ahead and translate? I'm not as clear on this one.
Okay, I will translate it for you. What kind of support does this mother who is victimized by the type of the kidnapping by the state have, especially with regard to a possible dam if the child is not ready to return to school? Retracting complaints is vital, but how to deal with possible backlashes against victims? As you brought on the video, the mother that had
well, I'm a little unclear exactly on what backlash against victims because of something that the journalists say or that they do. This is a little unclear to me.
Tá um pouco obscuro para ele, né, a informação com relação às represálias.
Na verdade, o que me parece é que a Sandra ela tá como eu fiquei, porque eu chorei na hora dessa matéria, imaginando, me coloquei no lugar dessa mãe. Mas eu acho que ela está mais interessada em saber o que aconteceu. O que ela quer saber é o que aconteceu com essa mãe. Ela teve apoio? É mais ligada à política de imigração do que o posicionamento do jornalista. Porque o jornalista chorou ao final.
Mas também, pelo que eu entendo, ela quer falar assim, a gente tem que reportar, a gente tem que denunciar. Mas é represália para a fonte, né? Para a fonte do qual a gente está fazendo a denúncia da situação. É isso que ela está perguntando, né? Essas represálias quando a gente faz uma denúncia.
About these backlashes, the main point is, if the journalists have to inform it deeply and about the backlashes to the victim or the victim family. The point is it.
Okay, I'm still not entirely clear, but I'll do the best I can. That I think that when we're dealing with victims, that we have to work with the victim and the victim's family to anticipate any possible backlash.
Ainda ficou um pouco, não ficou tão claro para ele, mas quando se trata de vítima, a gente tem que, e os familiares da vítima, a gente tem que buscar antecipar qualquer reação negativa.
And I think we need to be clear with the victim and try not to hide any information from them about the possible ramifications and impacts of the interview.
E a gente é interessante que a gente, com relação à vítima, não esconda nada deles, da vítima no caso.
So, regardless
Para
of the
eles,
type of
quais são os
story,
impactos que eles podem ter?
regardless of the type of story we're doing, the last thing we want is for the victim to be either surprised or re-traumatized.
E por se tratar da vítima, que a gente quer que ela não fique surpresa ou traumatizada.
And that should be our guiding principle.
Que possa ser o nosso guia principal.
Gracias.
Gracias.
No, you're supposed to say de nada.
Also.
Eu vou fazer uma pergunta, né? Até pegando carona na situação do Brasil, para explicar a vocês que estão assistindo, a rede de jornalistas pela diversidade na comunicação, a rede JP, é parceira do Centro de Jornalismo pela Paz, que tem o Stevie YoungBlood aí liderando, porque a gente entende que para promover a paz a gente precisa, e tem muita similaridade com o que a gente discute de diversidade e inclusão das minorias dentro do processo de comunicação. Então, eu queria perguntar para o Steve, a gente vive uma situação, Steve, em que nas nossas notícias as minorias são retratadas com um estigma negativo, homem negro, bandido, né? Então, guerras internas em que nas favelas, em lugares mais carentes, essas minorias que não estão presentes no processo de comunicação são as mais impactadas. Vou deixar o Lucas traduzir para eu terminar a pergunta.
Marceli told that she's asking about we have here in Brazil some kind of standardized way to show the people. For example, a black man is a huge guy, and these people, they are not impacted. They are not. They are really impacted on the news. Marceli?
Yeah. So I mean, traditional media often get stuck in these narratives, which can include negative narratives and stereotyping.
Que a mídia tradicional faz com que se fique preso nessas narrativas negativas e de estereótipos.
That's why these counter narratives that I talked about earlier are so important.
Eis o porquê a gente falou das narrativas anteriormente são tão importantes.
So, for example, in the United States, young African American males are traditionally portrayed only as either athletes or criminals.
Por exemplo, nos Estados Unidos, os jovens negros, né, eles são tradicionalmente retratados apenas como atletas ou criminosos.
That's why it's important that we have counter narratives that show different aspects of young African American males. Young African American males who are scholars, who are writers, who are musicians, who are entrepreneurs, and so on.
Eis o porquê. Então, é importante a gente mostrar as contranarrativas, mesmo que mostrem aspectos diferentes de jovens pretos americanos, que são acadêmicos, escritores, músicos, empresários e assim por diante.
Mulțumesc.
I don't know.
And your response is cu plăcere.
Cu plăcere. Okay, one more to learn.
It means with pleasure, cu plăcere.
Cu plăcere. Thank you.
Travou para mim, Eli. Eu acho que a gente vai caminhando para o final. Vocês estão me ouvindo?
Sim.
Sim. Agradecer ao Steve. Em breve, vamos fazer uma dinâmica maior presencialmente aqui no Brasil. Então, continue nos acompanhando. Queria perguntar ao Steve, aproveitar a oportunidade de ele estar aqui, e quais lições ao redor do mundo que vocês estão acompanhando, né, que vocês poderiam compartilhar e deixar para o Brasil, os insights, né, que você poderia deixar aqui para a gente neste momento.
Steven, can you bring the insights you are having around the world to Brazil, that insights you are getting in the country you are at know to bring to us here in Brazil?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Okay, we are going to the end of this class, and we also gonna want thank you. But the question is, if you can bring us about the insights you have according about the lessons,
So, yes,
the lessons and insights you
so
have to bring us.
So Marcel, I will send you all of the websites and some additional resources that you can share with your students.
Ele vai compartilhar com você, Marcele, os sites e as informações.
De nada.
Do you have some advice to us here? O senhor tem algum conselho para nos dar?
I would just say that it's been my pleasure being with you today, and I hope that this is the beginning of a long conversation about all this. And I'm awaiting my invitation to do this in person. It's been probably 15 years since I've been to Brazil, and even then I was just in Pernambuco. So I haven't been to the South. So I'm really looking forward to my next visit, and I hope that it's to see you all and to continue this discussion about peace journalism.
Ele agradece e diz que é o início de uma longa conversa sobre isso. Esteve aqui no Brasil há 15 anos atrás, em Pernambuco, não conhece o lado sul do Brasil, e está ansioso para vir poder conhecer e fazer essa conversa pessoalmente.
Na verdade, era essa a pergunta que eu ia falar. A gente te agradece. Pessoal, agora para a nossa próxima aula é com a Sandra Rosa, uma aula sobre diversidade também a partir da perspectiva ESG, e a Sandra é coordenadora de diversidade na rede de jornalistas, coordenadora de relações institucionais também, nossa, e vem compartilhar com a gente esse aprendizado. A gente agradece ele.
Quero agradecer muito a presença de todos aqui nessa aula. Thank you, Steven YoungBlood.
Pessoal, desculpa te interromper, mas é para foto e conjunto, entendeu? O pessoal poder ligar a câmera para dar aquele print.
Ah, sim, isso é bom.
Gente, a gente queria tirar uma foto de todo mundo, né? E se puderem, todo mundo aí que puder ligar a câmera, só pra gente fazer um print bonito, todo mundo sorrindo, vamos lá.
They are asking to keep with the camera open to take a picture.
Atenção, vamos tirar o print. 3, 2, 1, sorriso.
Mantém, pelo amor de Deus.
Queso? What's the word for cheese?
Deixa eu ver se tem mais gente com a câmera aberta.
Queijo.
Peço perdão. Mantenha o sorriso, por favor. Desculpa. Valeu, é isso. Obrigado, pessoal. Um beijo no coração de quem ligou a câmera e quem não ligou também. Deus abençoe. Tamo junto.
Thank you, Mr. YoungBlood. See you soon in Rio de Janeiro.
Yes, very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Obrigado, pessoal. Muito obrigado, gente. Próxima aula estaremos aí de novo com tudo.
É isso, gente. Até semana que vem. Beijo.
Até semana que vem, pessoal. Muito obrigado.